Slugs and snails can be a real problem in the garden, especially in springtime when you're trying to start with new plants. A question I often get asked is, what do I do to control snails and slugs in my garden? So in this video, I want to show you what I do generally to control the numbers and to reduce the damage. And I'll also show you a specific technique to reduce damage when you're starting new plants in springtime. Now, here in Tasmania, we have relatively warm winters, largely wet, and most of Australia is like that. And that means that the snails and slugs can be still quite active in wintertime and can breed, and their numbers can grow. If you don't actually get onto them quite early and deal with them before spring comes, they can be at plague proportions in the spring. And that's really a problem when you're trying to put out new plants, young plants, seeds, to get seeds to germinate, because they'll completely destroy them. While with a larger plant like this, you may see some holes occurring, and in the last video where I was removing some of the lower leaves, it was evident that some snails or slugs had been at them coming up from the ground. The damage to a larger plant like this is rarely going to be as bad as it is to a young plant. And so that's later. I want to really show you how to protect those young plants. But the number one thing that you can do is to actually prevent that spring plague of slugs. A few years ago, I had that problem here, and I wasn't aware of the lead-up signs, and spring came and there were massive quantities of snails especially around. There were so many that I was able to go out in the morning and collect like half a bucket full of snails. And if you've got that many, the easiest way of disposing of them once you've got them in a container is to pour boiling water on and kill them, and then I put them into the compost heap. If you've got smaller amounts, I generally like to feed them to the hens. So what are the techniques that you can use? Well, number one, of course, you can go around your garden and look for places where they might be hiding. Of course, if it's been raining, often they will be out and about, or it's really early and you might be able to see them easily. But hiding places are going to be places where there is dense foliage, usually, or something else that might be shielding them. So plants like this silver beet are going to be a problem, and you can actually see the evidence here that they're obviously hiding. They've been feeding on them, and so I can logically expect to find some hiding in this type of foliage. But actually locating them can be a challenge, because they get into the curls of the leaves and they might be quite low in the base. So, well, yes, there I found one, and when you locate them like this, you can actually, as I said, give them to the poultry or hit them with boiling water or something like this to get rid of them. But it's only a small one. If I had left it, by springtime it's going to be a lot larger and a lot more of a problem. Another place that I have where they like to hide is in the actual structure of these raised beds, especially in between the timber and the iron here. There's little places that they will hide. I can't feel any there with my finger right now, but oftentimes I have found them in spots like that. If you have timber or something like that lying around your garden, that's a place that they're also going to hide. So doing a little bit of search and getting rid of any snails that you can actually locate is a good start. However, it's not going to be practical to actually physically locate and remove or destroy all the slugs and snails from your garden. So what you're going to need to use is some type of baiting. Now, there's a variety of these things available, some that you can make yourself, such as using little pots with beer in it and that type of thing. However, my choice and my preference is to use a iron based snail bait. Now this is an iron chelate, but there are a number of other baits on the market which, like this, are made from elemental iron, and they are designed to be somewhat pet or wildlife friendly, and they break down into your soil as a nutrient rather than containing some toxic chemicals. And I find it is very effective to use these. So how do you use this? Well, the first thing that the guidelines say is don't put it in heaps. Scatter it thinly around in your garden. Now, so scattering around like these plants is fine. In doing this, I also will try and prioritize the edge, because the edge is where they're likely to be hiding or coming from. They could be underneath this lip, and they're going to move out from there towards the plant. So if they actually encounter this bait on the way, that's my ideal solution. Now this type of bait does disintegrate fairly quickly when it gets wet. So if you're going to water, make sure you do it after you've done your watering. Also, as I said, our winters are often wet, and because that's when I'm often wanting to do it, I've got to choose a time like now where I know that the next few days there is low likelihood of rain, and that way it's actually going to have some effect for a reasonable amount of time. But there is another way which you can use this type of bait that actually protects it from the rain and allows you to get a longer effectiveness. What you can do is to get some lengths of pipe. I usually go for something around 20-30 centimeters long, different diameters. I generally choose a black pipe because it's less noticeable in the garden. Those dark areas are going to be attractive to the snails to go into. Now you can block one end if you like, but open both ends is fine. Simply put a hand over one end while you feed some in. Now you don't need too much in there, just shake it around a bit so that it's spread around, and then I would fit it in against the edge here, and that way it's going to have a couple of entrances where the snails can actually come in and get at that bait, and the bait is going to be protected from the rain. So again, here I've got a patch of silver beet, and there is evidence of snails being around and likely to be hiding in it somewhere. Up against the greenhouse here is a place they are likely to hide. So I'm going to create a bait station, putting a little bit into there, spread it around, and pop that down into there where they can actually get at it and the rain's not going to be a problem. I'll put a little bit around as well just for the next few days, but being winter, I know that within the week there will be some rain, and so some of the scattered bait will be negated, and I'll need to come back probably every week and scatter a little bit around and also check those bait stations. Now occasionally you can actually see the evidence in other ways. Here against the wall of the house I can see there's been a lot of snails coming up here. They've been walking onto the glass. While I haven't noticed them so much, it's obviously been at night, and there's an area here that they are living where the plants are close up against the building. So this is an obvious spot that I need to come sprinkle some bait, and as I said, probably come and do this every week. And that will work to reduce the number. And while at the moment these plants are nicely developed, so they're not really a problem to them, if we were putting new plants in, or particularly in spring, this is when they're going to be a problem. And also they could migrate from here in the flower garden into the vegetable garden, where I would regard them as more serious. So if you're putting out young seedlings or planting seeds at a time when there's a lot of slugs and snails around, you know they're there, what can you do other than baiting? Well, you can use a physical barrier, and here's an example where Elizabeth has actually done that. She's put out some small seedlings here and used a pot with the base cut out of it and also a ring of copper tape around it. The slugs and snails don't like crossing that copper tape. You can buy that self-adhesive tape, and that's going to make it far more difficult for them out here to actually come and approach those seedlings. So use a pot that is an appropriate size to what you're actually going to plant out in terms of seedlings, and run your copper tape around. There's different widths of copper tape. I would probably go for the widest that you can get. I think it's going to give you more guarantee. The lip of the pot in itself is a physical barrier to snails coming over that sometimes works. Put your seedling in and put this in around it. It's going to also give it some protection from wind, so you're winning from that perspective as well. And it's going to allow it to get a start, because once the plant gets larger, it's not going to have as much trouble. I also would take a little bit of bait and put that around the outside to actually collect anything that was approaching that plant. Now, of course, with seeds, it's probably not going to work if you're putting out carrot seed or something like that. But if you're putting in something like a zucchini seed, you could plant that in there and it would be protected as it came up. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas what you can do. The most important thing, and the thing I would stress, is start early. Don't wait until springtime when the problem is serious and major. Clean up your garden now and work to actually reduce the numbers of snails and slugs around, and you'll have much less trouble in the springtime.